And that's why you're my favorite, Looney. You get a tweet now.
You know what? I'm better than this. Hello, everyone. So my Luna animations have been popping off, as it were. My whole channel, actually. I reached 10,000 subscribers recently, and I feel like I should do something big to celebrate, but for now we're focusing on this video, which I suppose is big in its own way. I'm modeling Blitz the Imp. You know his name, the O is silent. And I'm not doing it like in the animation I just showed where I throw his upper half together and have him T-posing around. I'm going to actually model, texture, rig, and animate him. Legitimately. I have almost exactly 8 hours of footage condensed into a half an hour. I'm going to try and commentate over it. I might also do a compilation of all my Luna animations, but with Blitz included this time. Included properly, I should say. Alright, let's get into it. So we start with the reference image. I don't know if I'd be able to model stuff quite as well if I didn't have a reference image. I sketched it myself with my own 2D art skills, heavily referencing the actual show, of course. I then import my Luna model to make sure he's the correct height relative to her, and then I go in and add in basic shapes. This to me is much more intuitive than modeling it vertex by vertex, or box modeling where you carve the shape into a cube with geometry. This is much closer to how drawing works. You start with basic shapes and work from that, except it's in 3D. Later, I join all the objects into one with Ctrl-J and use the remesh tool in sculpt mode to join all the geometry before smoothing it all out and drawing in the details, like the mouth. I also used the Boolean modifier to carve out his eyes, which isn't totally necessary. I could have just sculpted that in, but I felt I had more control over the result this way. I'm kind of worried that the footage is going too fast for you all to follow, but I figured this was in service of having the full modeling process condensed into a half hour, which is already a little long for my channel. Rest assured I'm not as competent as this sped up footage is making it seem. There's a lot of fumbling around as I tried to get Blender to work for me. The rigging process in particular was, and always is, the most frustrating part of the process. Fortunately, I managed to get a pretty decent result in the end, which I can always refine further as I see fit. I don't know why I modeled his neck thing so early on. My guess is that I wanted to try out modeling his clothes to see how the whole process would work. Now I began retopologizing. This used to be very tedious for me, but as I started gaining practical experience with 3D modeling, it started to become a relatively smooth process. One thing I learned is that you don't need all that much geometry, just enough to define the form. The subdivision surface, or subsurf modifier, takes care of the rest. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's a good idea to make sure that there's an even number of vertices around each geometry loop. Like if there's one too many vertices surrounding the eye, it's much harder to get a smooth result. You don't want triangles when modeling, you want everything to be quads, or rectangles. Fortunately, I was able to retopologize Blitz without any triangles. Here I'm testing the shoulders to make sure they'll rotate correctly when I rig the model. Here's the fun part about 3D modeling. You have to model the characters naked before you add their clothes. Let's just say the level of anatomical accuracy the base model has is completely dependent on what kind of artist you are. I know I said box modeling was kind of awkward for me, but the exception is definitely the hands. It's easier to model the hand out of cubes rather than trying to construct all the vertices manually. Again, the subsurf modifier will smooth out the fingers later. And that's why it's a good idea to create an even number of vertices when creating edge loops, so that you can easily connect the hand to the rest of the mesh without any issues. Here I'm duplicating geometry to create clothes. Blitz's outfit kind of overwhelmed me at first. Vivziepop tends to draw characters with a lot of details, but I just took a deep breath and did everything step by step. I was worried that the suit would be too hard to get right, but I managed it okay, albeit with a lot of what we modelers call finagling or fiddling. Again, this time-lapse makes me seem way more competent than I actually am, but what really matters in the end is the result. By the way, I know I already modeled Blitz's gloves for the Luna's Gift animation, but it would have been too awkward and messy to try and weld that onto the model. Starting from scratch was easier, plus I ended up coming up with a much simpler way to model the golden ornament on the center of his gloves. The original arm model had 4 separate chunks of geometry, but I was able to model it all in one piece this time around. There are many points in this time-lapse where I was telling myself, ugh, I'll have to cut all this out later, I'm getting nothing done. But I underestimated how fast it would appear in the final time-lapse. Modeling Blitz's lapels was one of those moments. All that time spent deleting them and trying again felt more substantial in the moment. Here I'm sculpting the little skull on his chest. I like sculpting. Specifically, I like how much better at sculpting and retopoing I am now than I used to be. I used to groan at this process, wondering if there was an easier way of doing things, but I eventually learned to love it. I was actually planning on copying geometry from my Blitz arm model, but like I said, I found a simpler method of adding that detail in. I like how I pushed the feet on Blitz's base model up when I modeled his heels, just like how people's feet sit inside heels in real life. So I got Bliss's tail completely wrong. In one of the reference images, it looks like Bliss's tail makes this fin shape, but I looked at actual images from the show and it turned out that that was just a weird angle, and his actual tail was an arrow shape. It's a good thing I caught that, and it's a good thing I was actually able to make that shape work with geometry. UV unwrapping. Basically, I just put the seams where I thought they should go, and then kept clearing and re-adding them until all the islands were evenly sized, and then I scaled up the important ones like the face, so I could add more detail in those areas. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are plenty of other videos that explain how UV unwrapping works. My experience with 2D art has enabled me to create some pretty snazzy eye textures if I do say so myself. I'm glad texture painting is a thing because it would have been very difficult to try and figure out where everything was supposed to go in the 2D image, so I'm glad I can just paint directly on the model. It was a little awkward when I kept forgetting that I had asymmetrical texturing on Blitz's face, and I had to clean up the streaks of color I had left on the other side of his face. For the details on the gloves and boots, I ended up just assigning a different material to the edges of the geometry rather than painting those details in. It was just easier to do it that way. See, here in time-lapse form this part looks fine, but when I was painting his tail I kept going in circles around the tail in the viewport trying to get the stripes straightened out. I felt like some sort of clown. Fortunately I realized I was able to fix the UVs there. I ended up enlarging the eyes after I realized that they were insufficient to properly stare at Moxie while he's trying to sleep. If you thought I was some sort of genius for creating such high quality rigs for all of my characters, well guess what? It was automatically generated with the free Rigify add-on which comes with Blender. You just line these template bones up and click the magic generate rig button. I literally didn't have to do any of that myself, it was all handled by the add-on. I swear if it weren't for this add-on, which quite literally allows me to skip a huge chunk of the 3D character creation process, I probably wouldn't have gotten into 3D in the first place. Same goes for the automatic weights feature. Imagine if you had to manually attach every part of the model to the armature. I don't know about you, but to me that sounds absolutely barbaric. By the way, the mask modifier hides parts of the model so they don't clip to the clothes. That's right, this is a Christian demon model. You'll have to wait until marriage to disable his mask modifier. Also, I accidentally had the hand bones too far backward. I was wondering what was going on there. Yes, this is the frustrating part of 3D, making sure everything deforms correctly, nothing clips through anything else. I had to make his suit thicker just so that the inside of his suit wouldn't clip through the outside of his suit. Not only is everything clipping through everything else, but some things are literally clipping through themselves. There is truly no escape. Time for the shape keys. This is the feature of Blender that allows you to add expressions to characters by making changes in the mesh that can be animated. This can also be used to fix deformation issues. Whenever I'm doing that, making corrective shape keys is the part where I feel like I'm actually in control of things. Here I'm trying to figure out how to get the eyes to track to the look bone properly. That was surprisingly difficult, and yet another part which is time-lapse is gleefully glazing over. Eye closing is definitely the hardest shape key to get right, because you have to make sure that the eye doesn't clip through the eyelids. Also, the intense amount of texture stretching is kind of annoying. I don't know if I'll be able to fix that, but I do know that in the animations I plan to do with him, the only time he'll be closing his eyes is when he's blinking, so you won't be able to see that for very long. And here I'm assigning each shape key to a bone in the rig so it's easier to give Blitz goofy expressions. Goofy expressions are definitely one of the most fun parts of 3D. This doesn't show up in the recording, but there's a graph editor window that pops up for each shape key driver, which lets you set how far the bone has to move for the shape key to be at its maximum value. When I was learning this process, there was this tutorial that explained how to figure out the value of the line of the graph using math. But it turned out you don't have to do that, you just move the bone to the right position and then move the line on the graph until the face matches up with the bone. No math necessary. And here I'm setting up the first test render where I tweak the materials to look at least slightly more like they're supposed to. So of course I had to give Blitz glowy eyes. My Luna model had the irises glowing while the rest of the eye was normal. And I was going to do that here, but it ended up looking kind of odd, so I ended up just making his whole eye glow. So overall, I think I did a pretty good job with Blitz, at least so far, especially considering his unique design, which I've never really done before. Hopefully I'll be able to live stream my animation process soon after this video is up, and I'll also do some off-camera tweaks as necessary. I think animation is by far the most relaxing when it comes to doing 3D stuff. There was no way in hell I was going to do that whole weight painting thing live. That's the thing, none of my models are perfect, but I'm always learning and improving. You know, the whole artist thing that artists tend to do. So stay cute, thank you for watching, and as always, you're welcome.